Nina. Thanks so much for joining me on a well-designed business today.
Hi, Luan. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Nina, today I want to focus on there's a couple of things
Sure.
in your journey in being a interior design business owner that stand out to me. Number one, you are international for us, and I love learning about design in other parts of the world. Um, but I also noticed in your background as I was reading about you that you started out as an architect.
Correct.
Not only is architecture somewhat male dominated
Hmm.
across, the US,
Yeah.
but I would think that in
Yeah.
Dubai and in different places like
Yeah.
that, it's very male dominated. So tell me about this experience and maybe, I don't often ask people why did they become something, but
Yeah.
what drove you to architecture
Sure.
knowing that this was going to be a factor for you?
Sure. So, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's a very male-dominated, industry. I think even in France. So I was born and raised in France. I'm originally Iranian, and I always knew, I think from the age of 2, 3, that I'm going to be an architect. So, when you're at school and your teachers ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? So as long as I can remember, it was written architect. I was a dictator when it came to my parents' house into organizing from the age of like 6, 7. So for me, it was a very, natural path, so I very naturally, applied to all the, exams to, get into the best architecture school in Paris. And I was really hesitant between interior and architecture. And I think a lot of students finishing high school might not know, interior design, architecture, urban design. And then so I decided to go for the bigger scale, thinking that if I go to the bigger scale, then the smaller scale might be easier for me to understand, so I decided to do that. So after studying architecture for 6 years and a half in France, which is like long studies where you don't sleep for 6 years, 2008 worldwide crisis. Honestly, there was no jobs in France. I mean, there was jobs in France, but I always knew that I would not see myself in a typical agency working 80 hours a week. And I always knew that for me, I felt deeply as a creative, but also as an entrepreneur. So at the time, I mean, the US is very different into the mindset, but Europe is still quite conservative when it comes to being young, motivated, and wanting to start your own business. So I knew I wouldn't be able to stay in Europe, and I had an opportunity to move to the Middle East, which was pretty much, like a blank canvas at the time. And you had the chance as a 22, 23 years old to prove yourself, So I
Yeah.
moved to the Middle East, which was even more a male oriented, industry where, so I actually moved to Saudi Arabia in 2008 because I had the chance to go teach the first batch of female architects that were graduating for the first time in 2008, the first 9 women that were graduating in architecture. And I was meant to go there for 4 months to teach them a semester. A semester
Mm.
turned into a lifetime in the Middle East, basically. And I realized very quickly that at 22, 23, I would be able to sign on a big project, So I stayed, and in this very male dominated industry, which, surprisingly, and often I'm asked this question, it only served me, so I didn't
Mm.
really face, misogyny, or in fact, being a woman was almost being an alien in the whole scene, right? So people would remember me, and people were like, oh, that's the French architect that just moved here, so it's like I was exotic, basically. I was exotic, and it was really not seen. And this is how I literally, signed my first project at the age of 23, which was, basically 50,000 square feet residential project for a very big industrial family. I can tell you, I cried for a year of that project every day because you went from school to, being thrown on designing such a big property. And so I got in from the contractor that was a British contractor established, there for the past 30 years. And so, yeah, this is how I started. But really being, in fact, in a male dominated industry never really was never a big con for me. In fact, like it always helped me. And I feel when I look at the European market or other markets, you can feel being a woman, and you can feel it sometimes as a negative way. Right now we have projects in the Middle East, but also in Italy, and I can clearly see the difference in Italy, where you can feel a bit of the misogyny, like you can feel, and I have a team of dominant women, in the team. So the architects, the designer, the PM. So, it's hard when you have a team of men, big teams of men, from MEP to structure, and then a woman, which is much younger, is basically their boss, So you have to have a strong personality, I guess, and shuffle between being soft, but very also strict, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, we're 5 minutes in, and I'm pretty sure I recognize that you do have a strong personality, right? Serves you well. The confidence comes through, right?
You have to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I have younger people that talk to me, it's like, we want to open a design office. What do you recommend? And I'm like, just try. Like you have to
I
be a,
recommend you do it.
yeah, like
Right.
you just have to take on risks. And I also think when you're young, there are risks that you're taking, and you don't realize how much of a risk it is. You just say yes and then you do it. I remember my first project in Dubai. We didn't even have a license to do this project. And I remember the client telling me, "Are you able to do that?" Without thinking, I said, "Yes." So I said yes. And then I decided to sort out how to do it legally, So,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah.
Oh my god, that reminds me, we had a guest on a couple of years ago, Lori Morris, who is a very high-end luxury designer. I want to say she's in Canada, but I
Okay.
wouldn't swear to it. I
Okay.
can picture her and her firm, and her photos are amazing. And the literally entire interview, she's like, when the client asks if you can do this, the answer is yes. The client asks, can you do this? The answer is yes. She goes, go figure it out and
Yeah.
figure out how to charge
Yeah.
for it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's also, I think after 15 years, I wouldn't agree so much if the client says, just do it, because I've learned also after 15 years to put boundaries. And I think this is
Yes.
very important in this industry and as a business owner to learn putting boundaries. Initially, the first like 6, 7 years of the business, like I would say yes to everything. So, you don't yet have an identity as a design office. So we would take on commercial project, residential project, but
Mm.
it served us so much because I feel the curve of learning and the way you develop is insane. Like 2 years ago we had our 15 years reunion with my architecture school in Paris, and I could feel, like, and yourself, you don't realize that you evolve, that your skills are evolving. You never realize where you're at unless you see it in somebody else's eyes, right? So for me, the
Yes.
past 2 years, I've seen it twice. Once in that school reunion, and once, a year and a half ago when we started having projects back in Europe, where I'm from. I realized it, like seeing the reaction of our contractors and suppliers, because we were issuing our design and our drawings, and they would see how much knowledgeable we were in topics that your typical designer would not have that knowledge, but we had to develop those skills because there is a real gap in the Middle East, right? So it's like, let's talk, I don't know, automation system, the
Mm.
typical architect in or interior designer in France, in Italy, would not know the detail of an automation system, or like will not go in depth into electrical system or plumbing system. Like our job is to be more creative, right? Even though we have technical
Okay.
skills, but we realize that we've developed those skills by default because we really had to understand them ourselves to make sure to guide the people here correctly, so
Right.
you have a lot of specialized people in Europe, in the US. Here that's not so much the case. People call
Okay.
themselves general contractors, and you just go with the flow and you learn, on the ground. So when you are very detail oriented and when you are very strict with yourself, and your clients are the two, let's say the 2% high net worth individual that have traveled all over the world, they will not miss out on something, on a corner, on a
Right.
system. So you are you have to learn that yourself, so there's no place for mistake.
Right. So a couple of things I want to pull apart in there. So I'll start at the end right
Sure.
there because I just think that's interesting. When your clients are the top
Yeah.
2%
Yeah.
high net worth individuals, you said something that I have said on the podcast
Yeah.
over and over
Yeah.
again. You're the expert. don't save my money for me. That's what I say. Don't save your clients money. And I know that it even is even more prevalent at that level, because to what you just said, it's not good enough that you don't know automation. That client, even if they haven't heard of
Yeah.
automation yet, they're going to. And
Yes.
if you're not the one that says, hey, let's think about doing a home automation system, or God forbid, you probably wouldn't get so far as to not put home automation in 2024.
Yeah.
But if there's something else that you don't suggest, and the first one of their top 2% people walks in and says, how come you didn't get
Yeah.
this in your house?
Yeah.
It is not like,
Yeah.
oh, next time.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a
So
big deal,
you
right?
have to be up to date. And like the reality is you have to surround yourself with the right partners. And I think the field we're in is all about teamwork.
Yeah.
This is not a job you can do individually, and you need to be able to count on people. And as the year go by, like you need to be able to surround yourself with experts that are better than you. So I always say, as the year go by and as we develop as a design office, I just want to work with people that are better than I am, because I want to learn from them, right? So last year we spent, 2 years working on a very big palace in Saudi Arabia for one of the big industrial families, and we spent a year producing moldings with a company in France that does, Versailles Castle and all the historical castle. But I learned so much through that, because you're talking people that are historical houses that are so specialized in that craft. But it's a luxury and it's a pleasure to have the budgets to work with those
Yes.
people. But of
Yeah.
course it wasn't always like that. But as you said,
Right.
those clients travel all over the world. There are people that they might not know, that X automation system is the best, and they might not know the latest.
Right.
But when those clients go in the best hotels in the world, right? So
That's
they
right.
will press a button and they expect all of this to happen. So the level of requirement of those people is, for me, unprecedented. Like, we have to be in their brain. And I always say I feel more like a psychologist than an architect at times, because you have to be ahead of their demands, and you have to really,
Right.
you know s- wonder, what would that person want, and
Yeah, because if they
yeah.
feel like they're the one consistently bringing it up to you, they
Yeah.
start to wonder, what do I need you for?
Yeah, of
Right?
course.
Even though there's a thousand other things you do
Yeah.
other than just bring the ideas, but that's the small, narrow focus that they might have. And to your point, they're visiting palaces around the
Yeah.
world. They're visiting the highest, that they're not visiting the rooms that are 400 a night. They're visiting the
Yeah.
rooms in the hotels that are
For
40,000 a night.
exactly. And they have friends, right? So, and their friends are people like them, right? So it's, if
Yes,
they don't
yes,
see it in this, they will see it in and they would
that's
like,
right.
why isn't this
How come I don't have
yeah, yeah. And
it?
and yeah, they're usually very educated people. And again, as the years are going by, I feel our clientele gets kind of higher and higher, and that's the goal,
More
right?
up
And
leveled,
and
yes.
also, usually this type of profile are quite control freaks. There are people that
Yes, they didn't get
that
there by
yeah,
accident.
I mean, they didn't get there by accident. There are people that are CEO or owners of huge corporations. There are people that fly their own planes, and
That's
so,
right.
but they still care about picking up a fabric. So it's, how do you do that? You know what I mean? It's challenging.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the other things that I wanted to go back and, because you went right by it, like 23 years old, a minute out of school,
Yeah,
and your first project is a
yeah,
50,000 square foot home.
yeah.
I mean, you didn't even have a team yet. So,
No.
like, how did you manage
I
it?
mean,
First of all, high
yeah.
five for saying yes, okay, and
Yeah, I
just
mean,
being like, I'll figure it out. But that's a pretty significant project there, just to
Luan, just
manage
to
it.
make you laugh, we designed the first project, the first draft. I went to the contractor and he's like, "Excuse me, where are all the socket outlets?" We just had come out of school, like, you don't learn about switches and socket, at least in France, in France, schools of designs are very theoretical. They teach you to think.
Oh,
They're not giving
oh,
you those technical skills because they consider France is a very theoretical, philosophical country, right? Where they care about aesthetics and concepts,
yes,
and the way you think is more important than learning how to build a wall. But then
Yeah, they
here
figure
we
you'll figure
go.
that out somewhere
Yeah.
else.
So basically 2008, 2009, most of my friends who graduated, with me don't have a job, because again,
Mm.
2008, 2009. So I literally take my phone, I sign the project for a ridiculous price. You don't know how to price at the time, right? I mean, I charged $70,000 to do this property. I'll never forget, but for me, it's
Oh
just,
my
but
gosh.
it paid me and my team for the year. You know what I mean?
Well,
So
and that's the thing, it's at the same time, you know now how
yeah,
ridiculously
yeah,
low it is,
of
but at
course.
the same time, at 23 just
Yeah,
graduating, it's
yeah.
like, "We okay, there's our year's salary for me and all my buddies."
Yeah, exactly. So, I had half of my friends that were not working. I called them and I'm like, guys, I'll pay you, $500 a week. Are you in? So we worked like insane people day and night. And I'm telling
Oh,
you, like I was leaving the contractor's office on a daily basis in tears because,
oh,
but it really taught me because they were British contractors in the Middle East. They were part of the top five best contractors, and very, very strict, like British school, old school, still doing drawings by hand. So for us it was, and I realized nobody else was like them after that, but it taught us
mm,
to be so detail oriented, to care about every single corner. Their execution was impeccable, so
mm,
it was a lot of it was a huge learning experience and very positive, and from those clients then we ended up doing the project for the whole family because this was the
whoa,
eldest brother, and those are large industrial family. There is a cousin, there
yeah,
is a sister, there is a brother. 15 years down the line, we're finishing the youngest sister villa. You know what I mean? So
wow, wow.
it's
You were able to raise your rates along the years,
yeah,
though.
I mean, you would hope so, no? But that's not easy. Like again, for
Mm,
us in France, we did not have a class or any learning on how to price projects. So it was literally
mm,
me going on Google and trying to understand, first of all, what are even the step of the project? Like just from
right,
that basic understanding of what do you do, like to submit a full-on project from A to Z. So it's a lot of again learning on the ground. So we've done so much mistakes, but I can say like I learned the hard way by doing mistakes.
yeah,
Nobody was there
mm,
to tell me do it this way, but somehow then we became better at it because believe me, when you do two mistakes you're not going to do a
yeah,
third mistake because
no,
I'm
it's
like when
hard,
I priced twice wrong and I'm like, how the hell am I going to pay the salaries? You realize that no,
yes.
that's the wrong pricing. I still feel I underprice, so it's just it's a continuous challenge, right? Because your team gets better, so of course like your overheads gets higher, and so it's a snowball effect, right? So
Yes. No, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm also curious, was it had to be like a networking thing? Like, who would recommend a 50,000 square foot project to a
I mean,
23-year-old?
Luan, this is how at the time in 2008 in Saudi Arabia, it was really a black canvas of design, and there was a huge lack
Oh,
of supplies of architects, so
of the of
so
of
so
of you. Yeah.
I arrived there way before, so the Middle East really opened, like Saudi Arabia really opened the past like 5 6 years. But when I was
Okay.
there in 2000, when I went there in 2008 2009, I was the only woman in the plane. I'll never forget when I was doing round trip between Paris and Saudi or between Dubai and Saudi. I was the only woman in the plane, so it's,
Whoa.
until the age of 30, I always had like customs at the airport stopping me because they couldn't understand what a single woman written CO on her residency was doing there. It was very, very unseen, so I was really an alien, so I had to kind of develop that attitude. And then when it started to become too difficult to hire the right teams there, this is when I also opened the office in Dubai. But yeah, it's there was no supply of resources. So the
That's
contractor,
crazy.
so those clients had hired a team in London. They had actually hired a team in LA. And all of those people, and you're talking, they had paid already probably, I had billed $70,000, but I remember seeing fees of the LA office, which was $1 million, you know? So those people had already, when I came into the picture on my first project, had tried 3 times to design their homes. But you know, there is such a big gap between the understanding of an office in London or in LA and the reality on the ground in the Middle East. So I think
Yes.
if, unless you're really here and deeply understand the market and deeply understand the client, it was not working. So they ended up putting in the trash, you know, those $1 million in design fees. And we came in, and I'll never forget, like, of course, the way I convinced them was not by billing them initially. The contractor introduced me, and I was very naive because I didn't know who those people were. You know, like I was 23, but they were one of the most important industrial family in the region, you know. So it's
Wow.
I met them and I said, you know, from my 23-year-old French ethics, the designs that you had until now are disastrous. Like I literally said that, you know. I thought they were disastrous. You know what? Like very often, unfortunately, a lot of outsider office design offices from the US, from London, with all due respect, do not know the market and see them,
Right, of
yeah,
course.
and see
I
the
could see how
Middle
that would
East
be a
and see the
disconnect.
Middle East a bit as, you know, the a golden cave, you know, where they're going to be
Yeah, yeah.
able to make a lot of money with very wealthy people. But then, you know, I don't know what's a project worth if you don't execute it, you know. So a lot of time it
Right.
stays on paper because it's just not realistic what's being designed
Mm.
against the market capabilities, right? So I went to the client and said, you know, give me 2 weeks. Me and my team are going to give you a proposal, like a design. I don't
Me
want
and my
anything.
fantasy team that I
Yeah.
have to gather up as soon as I walk out of this
Yeah.
office.
So I called my friends and I'm like, and at the time I was teaching at the university and it was my first salary. And I called my friends and I said, I'll pay you each $200 a week, which was nothing, but this is all I had. And I said, guys, let's do that. And if we do that, I'll hire you for the next year, you know? So after we didn't sleep for 10 days. And I remember the client had a 20-seater dining table. I filled at the time the 20-seater dining table was A3 board. At the time, we were still printing boards, you know, and they were like, wow, you know, they realized that in 2 weeks, without asking for any money, we had done more than the London office that had built like $1 million, you know? So,
Whoa.
yeah.
Whoa.
So this is how we
That's
started.
awesome.
Yeah.
You know, it's a testament to having to have your intuition, your gut instincts moving with you
Yeah.
because,
It's
you
so
know, there's so
important.
many times, you know, we're saying, "Oh, don't do a stick of design work. Don't put a pen to paper. Don't put a pencil to anything
Yeah.
until you get paid."
Yeah.
But for the most part, I would say that that is
Yeah.
probably a very
Yeah.
true and good advice statement.
Yeah.
But there are just times when you just know it in your bones that you've got to do the extra above and beyond
Of
to
course.
make the impression,
Yeah.
right? It's there's a difference between going for it and risking
Yeah.
and laying down and just doing something for free that
Yeah,
somebody, you know what,
of
right?
course,
Would you
of course.
agree? Right?
Like I would say to any newcomer or any like young designer, I 100% believe in intuition because you know at the end of the day you're dealing with human beings, right? So
Mm.
many time, Luan, I mean now lately, you know, I'm being very selective and we're talking about boundaries and like saying no and actually being picky. But again, this took 15 years to reach that point. But you know, sometimes it's a matter of chemistry, right? Like you meet
Right.
a client and the gut instinct is not there, the intuition is not there, and you're like, maybe I'm gonna go against the wall, like, you know, I'm gonna hit a wall because if we don't get along, I'm gonna end up doing 20 revision because maybe
Mm.
I'm not gonna get what the client wants. So I think it's also important to put your foot down and say, I have to listen to my intuition rather than strictly finances. You know, for us, this is really how we operate, you know.
Mm.
And yeah, I think one disadvantage, like in my case, is I had no financial knowledge, you know, like, and I was really
Mm.
a creative and an entrepreneur at heart, and nobody had taught me about, you know, P&L and, you know, finances and cash flow, and the reality is this is major for a small company, right?
Yes.
So
It's 80%
I
of it,
guess,
right?
you know, like I failed massively 2 times, not in project, but into the
Mm.
finances and managing the team and, you know, cash flow, you know, because
Mm.
too often I would want to do good and I work so much ahead of time without necessarily asking for a payment. And then guess what? The client doesn't pay. Also, I guess this is a very different aspect from the Middle East to the US is, you know, having five attorneys here is a bit useless when you're fighting against the most powerful people in the region. You know what I mean? What can you do as a 26, 27-year old if you're in front of the most powerful families in the region? Not much, I
And they
can
can just,
guarantee.
like,
Yeah,
have their lawyers do it for
yeah,
hours and hours
yeah.
and hours and run you in a circle,
And
right,
destroy
it's
your
useless.
reputation on top of that, you know?
Sure.
So
Right, right, all your referrals.
that's a very big challenge. I would say, like, it was a big challenge. It always is a big challenge. So we've learned over the years, my advance payment is always 60% advance payment, on any
Mhm,
given project, so
mhm.
we're lucky enough now that, our clients trust us and, appoints us for overall projects, but it was not always the case, for the past
Right,
15
right.
years.
Crazy, crazy. Now, your company now has offices in Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Milan,
Correct,
right?
correct. In Italy, yes.
And I understand you have approximately 16 people on the team.
Correct.
Okay, and what you talked to me about was that you have architects on your team, interior designers, draftsmen, studio coordinators, project managers, your finance team,
Yeah,
your marketing team, and the business development team.
correct.
So tell me, where does Nina spend most of her time within these roles? Like, are there 2 or 3 areas that you sit in? Do you cross lots of them? Like, what, like a company like this, what is your day to day,
So
week to week, month to
I
month?
mean, I don't think I'm an example for anyone, but Nina is drowning on the work and is spread very, very thin. And I think it's the
Aw.
problem of many entrepreneurs that are leading small and medium enterprises, like as an SME, it's just, it's between, how do you do? You're not at the scale where you're going to hire a CFO and, like, you don't have those funds necessarily. We're getting there,
Mhm.
so you're ending up, everywhere, right? So I
Yeah.
spend a lot of time. I'm still the head of design, I could say it this way, but as the year go by and as the team evolves more and more, they're also managing to do the whole customer relationship and understanding the client. I think my forte was always to get into the head of the client. So being head of design was always very important because, my designers, my architect and interior designer might design something and I would say, and I'd always tell them, please don't take it personally, but that client is going to hate that. And I'm not saying
Mm.
it from a personal point of view. I just put myself because I know the client so deeply, So
Yes.
a lot into design, a lot into detail, a lot also on site. So as I said, because we're doing turnkey project from A to Z, from design to execution, of course we have project manager in the team that their daily, let's say
Every day
scope
they're on
is,
site.
yeah, they're on
Yeah.
site and they follow up with contractors, suppliers. But as I said, you need to have a very, very strong personality, and unfortunately here, unless you're the boss, often they don't listen to you, so I always need to intervene. And there are instances, we just handed over a very, very luxurious penthouse here in, so the Bulgari hotel here in Dubai has residences that are very, very luxurious and has like two penthouses of the sort in Dubai. We just handed over one and I ended up being on site 2 months straight every single day, because there
Oh.
was delays and the contractors were not exactly doing what we were asking them. So I had to personally be there. So it's challenging because you have a whole business to
So, yeah,
handle, right?
so let me ask you a
Yeah,
question about that. Are you saying that that is sort of a cultural thing where your projects are, that, the contractors and the subs, if they don't want to do what's supposed to be done and it doesn't serve them because they're running behind or
yeah,
whatever, that they're more likely to just ignore the orders from your project
yeah,
managers and even for other
yeah,
companies, that culturally
yeah.
it's like if the boss didn't
Yeah.
say it to their
Yeah.
eyeballs, they
Yes. Yes.
will ignore it.
We don't
That's
have that
annoying.
issue in Europe, for example. We have other
Okay.
issues. So see here in the Middle East, timelines are extremely fast. So we would do a project in a year. In Europe, it would take two. So because we see it, we have
Ah.
simultaneous project in Milan and in Dubai, right? So the problems are others. Like in Europe, I would say to the team, this is the lead, this is the project manager. Of course, that person reports to me, but I 200% trust them to manage the site, right? Here, The project manager might say something and it's not done. So I have to come, be very aggressive on site, and then it's going to get done, and harass people, really. However, when it's there, then it's done very fast, so
I'm
it's a
just picturing you
cultural.
clackety clacking onto
I
that
mean,
site and
it's
just being like, "This is
it's
how it's gonna
oh, I
go."
mean, I don't know if you, I mean, so we're very present on Instagram and on our social media, and we really, if people want to see what it looks like, we film day to day what's the behind the scene look like, because to me it's very
Oh,
important. Like, I think design offices, sometimes you just see the glamorous aspect, but that's really the tip of the iceberg, right? Like, the
right,
reality is not glamorous. Like, I tell to whoever comes and interviews just to get a job in my office, I'm like, it's not pretty. It's
right.
chaotic. It's hard. Your hands are in the
Stressful.
dirt. It's very, very stressful. So you're dealing with so many different culture. So the Middle East has the advantage and disadvantage of, like, having it's such a multicultural places. Like, you have European, North American, Asian, in, like, very, very
All of it.
multinationality. So where you're on a project, you're dealing with people that are from, no exaggeration, 50 different cultures, 50 different background. So
Wow.
it's really like, when we work in Italy or in France, I know the French mindset. I know the Italian mindset.
Mm,
Like, I know the culture. I know how to behave with them. I know how to talk. But imagine dealing with 50 different culture. It is not an easy task. You have to, I think adaptability is a key word, and patience, like, so here, those are the challenges. But once it goes on, it goes on. It's very fast. Like, people would work here 16, 17 hours a day, or would work
whoa.
overnight, double shift. Nobody would do that in Europe, you know?
And by the way, they shouldn't, right? Like, people shouldn't work
Yeah,
like 16
no,
hours
of
a day.
course. But
But culturally, it's what
yeah, I mean,
happens, and
look,
that's a thing,
in
right?
in places like in Dubai right now is a place where it's becoming, the Monaco of the Middle East, right? You have
Mm,
a lot of wealthy people from all over the world doing extreme investments here, are expecting very high levels of property. Right now there are villas. I mean, this was unimaginable, 10 years ago. You have villas that sell for $100 million, which is insane to me. You know what I mean? So
that's
it
nuts.
became this crazy spectrum where the ultra rich, are moving, and of course the ultra rich and ultra wealthy need services. So
That's
it's
right.
it's it's becoming a very particular market, an interesting market nonetheless. But
Mm.
it's an interesting adventure.
Yeah, and it is, and it's, just understanding how you have to swim in and out of the different
Yeah.
types of cultures. It's funny because a couple years ago, I had a podcast with, Mina Duque,
Okay.
who is Moroccan,
Okay.
had lived for a time in the US, and now lives in Tulum, Mexico.
Okay.
And, as interest, her husband is the founder of Duke Renders, which is
Okay.
a rendering firm. And Mina, doing business as a designer in Mexico
Yeah.
now, was talking about the one of the distinct cultural differences that she had to learn and really
Yeah.
work within
Yeah.
was that, if a contractor in Tulum says we're going to be here tomorrow morning,
It means after
it's like it means
tomorrow.
nothing,
Yeah.
it's like it could be 11, it could be
Yeah.
3 in the
So
afternoon, it could be
so
tomorrow the next day,
I guess South American have this commonality with Middle Eastern. It's
Oh, Middle East is that way
maybe.
too?
Yes means maybe. You know what I mean? So there is no reliability, Luan, like, at all. So
Oh,
for
that's so hard to run a firm
it's
like that.
so hard. It's like
Oh,
the like your anxiety when you're like goes up to the roof, because
oh,
on that last project, how many days I woke up screaming because I have to call the boss of the contractor. I have to call the driver to see if they've left the factory, if the 50 laborers have left. Like, it's calling myself the subcontractors that are working for the contractor to make sure they're there at 7:30 a.m. So it's like that. So it's
oh,
those to understand. So it's a lot of, European or Americans or like that come here and that are used to structure and reliability. are in deep shock, and so often they can't resist that. So I always say, for me, after working in the Middle East, because we're venturing out a bit, like, of course, in Europe, but I'm actually right now also looking at Australia. I know it sounds
Uh-uh.
crazy, but I'm also looking at Australia in terms of
Actually,
projects.
from you, it sounds pretty
uh,
normal.
but uh, but for me, everything is so structured, and I'm like, after working in this environment, it feels like working anywhere else feels easy,
Wow.
because my
Yeah.
base was working on chaos, right? So it's like when you
Yes.
realize things are structured, you're like, wow,
Oh, I can breathe.
if a contractor or supplier gives me a lead time and respects it, I'm like, and clients actually pay. And you can actually sue the client if he doesn't pay?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Now, do you mostly function as the rainmaker for your company, Nina, where you're the one that's networking and bringing in the clients and closing the deals?
Unfortunately, yes,
Yes.
yes. Yeah, so
Well, you seem to be. You would
I
be the
mean,
best person for that,
yeah, but it's
actually.
also hard because I think a lot of, again, office like mines is very, like, the person is the business, right? So I
Mm.
didn't reach the stage yet where I'm replaceable. I wish I
Mhm.
would be. You know what I mean? Like, I worry. I'm like, what if I'm on a plane crash? Like, what is I mean, God forbid, but I, like, last year I had an injury and I couldn't work for 2 weeks, and like that's still my reality, and that's still a massive challenge that I face as an entrepreneur. And we're
Mm.
starting to work on that. Is like, which team to build so it could be a bit less of me, but again, it
Yeah.
takes time because you need to reach a certain point of turnover as a design office to be able to hire that right hand that's senior enough. You know what I mean? So it's,
Yes.
you
Yes.
can't, where you're at a certain level. I just couldn't afford to hire, let's say, a project manager that's going to cost me $10,000 a month, because we were not there yet. So now we're at
Mhm.
that stage where we're trying to see how I can detach a bit more, just to work more on business development and how we want the business to evolve, because I think it's a constant evolution. Like, I really feel a small business looks like a heartbeat monitor, like it's not a straight
Mm.
line, it's like it's
Right.
up and down, and it's like it's a roller coaster. I always say, and now I learned the answer, I always say, is it going to get calmer? And yes, it gets calmer for 6 months, but then something happens and it's like insanity, right? So, but yeah,
Right.
we are hardly now. One of our target this year is, how can I be less in micromanagement, because this is right now I'm split between doing finances and working with the procurement team and overviewing design and being on site and, making sure our marketing is there and sending newsletter, and you know what I mean? So it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think you're right to know that it's something that should be on your plate.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, you had that situation where you were out for 2 weeks, and even it's gonna be more like, it's challenging, to your point, for any entrepreneur to build in that replaceability for
yeah,
themselves, and of course, we don't actually, until we're ready to sell a business, we don't actually need to be 100% replaceable, but we should be always
of course,
striving
of course.
for more ability to be replaceable, and I it's a challenge for any of us, but when you think about and you talk about how you don't get a reaction unless the owner
Yeah,
calls,
yeah,
that's gonna be even tougher. It's
yeah.
almost like, I wonder how you'll have to deal with that, if you'll have to present somebody as a partner, or, I don't
So you
know,
basically
or they
have
just
to
have to be introduced from
accept,
the beginning.
it's very hard because you have to accept that maybe things are not going to go your way. So you have to
Mm.
accept that maybe mistakes are going to be made, and you have to willingly accept to let go. So that's why you
Yes,
need to
in
be,
order to
yeah.
build
and
yourself in
and you need to
replaceability,
also, I would
absolutely.
feel like you need a financial buffer at that time, because the reason why I react, and it's also, time is money, right? So the reason why I
Yes,
need to get this done is because I don't want to pay penalty on a project. So, but then I
right,
also have to make sure that somebody can step in my footstep and make sure that, well, if the contractor doesn't want to be responsive, you know maybe if the project manager repeat and repeat after a week, maybe it's going to take a week instead of a day, but eventually it
right.
will get there. So
Well, and you
it's,
might have to, for your business model, in that regard, that one slice of a trauma problem, you might have to have that person that's your right hand and that one
Yeah,
starting be incentivized to
of course.
net profits
Of course, of
because
course.
now they have that same,
Yeah.
no, no, not a week a day. You know
Like,
what I'm saying?
in fact, we are looking at a strategy for this year to, we had team members that were in the office for like 7, 8 years. So we have team members that have been here for a while, and we're looking at how to make sure they're ultra motivated. So we're looking again at, you
Yes.
know, profit sharing. And so we're looking at this. And right
Yes.
now we're also looking at having our own project. So, the past year and a half, we've developed a lot of projects for our client. And I'm like, sorry, but the return on investment they have is so much higher compared to the money we make. So I realized, I'm like, Nina, you have the skill, you've developed that skill, try to do it for yourself, because the reality is then, me to be able to get somebody really senior, like, then I'll be able to go hire somebody that's going to cost me $15,000 a month. But that's okay, because then, if I do my own project and raise the fund to do my own project, and I have a return on investment, like, just to give you an example, the last project we did is a project that, from an investment point of view, from buying the property and the work and the fit out that we've done, would be a project that costed around, $15 million. In a
Mhm.
year, this project now worth $35 million. So you
Whoa.
could imagine the return on investment for the client if he decides to
Sure.
sell, right? He had two
Right.
offers in a week after handover from Sotheby's International, so, and then the next door penthouse that was refurbished was evaluated much lower. So I went to the client and I said, you know what? The difference of $10 million in valuation is us, is not the value of the property, is us. But it took me 15 years to, the imposter syndrome, like when you start
Yeah.
so young, you don't realize it. And I think you don't see your self value. Like,
Yeah.
this was for me my biggest challenge. Like, it took me so long to put boundaries and to realize that what we offer is really valuable, and to just either put the right price tag on it, or to actually go and ask, you know, if my client is doing this property for investment purposes, well, go and negotiate a percentage of the profit. Why not?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
this would make us more comfortable as an office, because
Mhm.
probably that small share of profit equal the whole fees that we took for a year to do that. It's not
Yes.
comparable, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking into
Well,
this
I
this
think
year.
you have a
Yeah.
very straight line. I think you have a straight line to that. I mean, particularly in the situations when you're in some sort of penthouse, I mean, high-rise
Yeah.
situation where
Yeah.
one apartment is worth
Yeah.
15 million, and then after you're done it's worth 35.
Yeah.
That's literally what's debatable about that.
Yeah.
And it's like, "Hey, give me 2%
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what it's worth
Yeah.
after I'm done." Plus
Yeah.
you have to do the design fees
Yeah.
because
Of
what if they
course.
don't sell it?
Of course.
You have to
Of
do
course.
all that, but then you just say, "And here's the little, vig on the end."
Yeah.
And there has to be a way to figure that out. And, my brain just went to there's probably some lawyer somewhere that's going to figure out that that's illegal. But, I don't know. You're going to figure
I
that
mean,
out.
things are a bit more flexible in the Middle East. Let's put it this way, you know?
You have to watch this on YouTube. You have to see her face. She's like, well, I mean,
But yeah, I mean, we have to
that's
find,
funny.
like, I think, again, as a small and medium sized company, we have to constantly find ways to reinventing ourselves, and to
Yeah.
diversify, and to how can we become better, and how can we
Yeah.
become more efficient and happier at what we do, because what
Yes.
we do is so hard, so energy consuming. And we need to see, like, I think one very important take for me, for your audience that might be younger and that is just getting into this, is work life balance. For me, I feel
Hmm.
I've sacrificed so much. And like, I don't think nobody like told me enough, Nina, really, the more you're going to have a balance in your life, the better your job is going to become. So it's,
Mm.
if you're exhausted, if you're burnt out, how can your creative brain function? Like,
No.
the past week, I have worked a lot and I've slept less than 7 hours a night. Well, guess what? I'm in the office and I have to do selection for a project. My
And you don't
brain
care.
cannot work as well. Like, match this
Right.
fabric with this fabric and this finish with this finish. is not
It's like,
right. Like
whatever.
you're
Right.
still a creative, so it's like for me,
Yeah.
where I still am and where I still see myself is the creative aspect, because this is what I love to do, and this is who
Yes.
I was since I was a kid, so this is very important to me, and not to lose that aspect of being a creative against being an entrepreneur and against the everyday worries of a business, from the
Mm.
financial challenges to handover challenges to client management, again, 2% high
Mhm.
net worth individual, that is very difficult to manage.
Yeah, I can imagine. Before I let you go, I want to go back. You just brought it up from being creative as a child. When you said, as a very young toddler, you knew you wanted
Yeah.
to be an architect, what was the exposure? Was there someone in your family that was like, how would even a 2 or 3,
I
4 year
mean,
old
look,
even know what an architect is?
I think growing up in France and in Paris is already an advantage, right? So
Okay.
I
So just
I
surrounded
think
by the
I
history and the
always
buildings.
get asked this question, is creativity innate? And I do
Mm,
think that creativity and aesthetics is can be an innate talent, but it's something that definitely you develop. So I grew up surrounded, like, I grew up in a historical city. I grew up, traveling a lot. So my mom always made it a point for us to travel every 6 weeks. So I think by the age of 15, I had really traveled the world, so I was very
wow.
independent, had seen, being Persian originally, we have a lot of families in the US, a lot of families all over Europe. So I had seen, Middle East, Asia, US. So you get exposed to so many, I would say, urban differences, so you feel cities, so for me, I was very sensitive to that. Like even as a kid,
Mm,
I would never get lost. I had such a sense of orientation and seeing buildings. And so I think it was around me. My aunt was also an architect. Like we have a few architects in the family,
oh,
but my
nice.
parents are purely scientists. My mom has a PhD in mathematics, my dad in physics and chemistry. So they're scientists. So I was
They're like
really
the Curies from
yeah, like
France.
the
Marie Curie and
actually, my mom, her nickname is Marie Curie, so it's funny.
see?
It's
Yeah.
funny you say that, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I was surrounded by it, so that was a big
Mm,
chance, growing up in Paris, like the capital of historical architecture, but
mm,
then again, having really a passion for it. So I was,
mm,
in art school since the age of like 8, 9, like
mm.
I was very advanced, like I would do sculptures, drawings. I would spend my weekend in the Louvre Museum,
Wow.
so I guess I had that in me, so, and all over the years, it developed, and really at home, I was like, I would choose everything, so from a very young age. So,
Well, your mother and father being in science and math, they're like, "Whatever, we don't care. Pick whatever
oh
color you want,
yeah,
sweetie.
they're
It'll be
calling
fine."
me the space dictator, and I'm very sensitive to that, even today. For me, spaces are the most important. Like, I cannot sleep in a bad space. Like, for me, wherever I go,
Mm,
wherever I travel, I am so sensitive to spaces. Like, I am so sensitive to a bad lighting design, So, for me,
mm,
spaces are places that are, so I'm not really into skyscrapers, and like, I like human scale, because I think we
mm,
design for people, right? So,
yeah.
and whereas I graduated as an architect, I really am against boundaries into design, So France is very, boxy. Europe is very boxy. You're either an architect or an interior designer or an industrial designer or a lighting designer. And I never believed in this. I always believed
Mm.
that you need to, it's as important to know how to design a chair than choosing the tassel for the chair, and also knowing about structure, So I think this was my
Right.
deep interest. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. My goodness, what an amazing career. And
Thank
of
you.
course, you're really just on the tip of it here, even 15 years
Thank
in or
you.
whatever it is. You've got so much ahead of you.
Thanks.
And I agree with you. Before you go, I have to just reiterate your own words. You do need to build in the structure in your team
Yeah,
so that you can be
absolutely.
able to step away for
Yeah,
pleasure or for
yeah,
challenges,
yeah,
so that, you don't do all this for nothing and it
yeah.
falls apart, right? Like a house of cards, right?
Well, we can reconnect in 1 year and I'll give you the
Yes,
conclusion of where we're at.
that's I love it. I love it. Thank you, Nina, so much for being here and sharing your story with me. I appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you so much, Luan, for having me and for giving me the chance to tell my story.